She expected the human to eat her, but he did the exact opposite. Part 2. The silence that followed their broadcast lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before chaos erupted across the settlement below. Nira's voice, amplified by Trey's modified transmitter, had reached far beyond their expectations, carrying words of truth and rebellion to every corner of the valley. From their vantage point on the ridge, Nira and Trey watched as confusion spread like wildfire through the Festival of Three Moon celebration. "It worked," Nira whispered, her vertical pupils dilated with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. "They heard us." Trey quickly dismantled the broadcasting equipment, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "And so did the priestcast. We need to move. Now." The words had barely left his mouth when alarm horns blared from the temple spires. Warriors poured from the central pavilion, their weapons gleaming in the light of the ceremonial fires. At their head strode a commanding figure in elaborate regalia, High Priest Zaruk himself, his scales darkened with rage. "Find them!" His voice carried even to their distant position. "Find the heretics and the sky demon. No settlement shall harbor them." Nira and Trey retreated into the dense forest, the precious transmitter components secured in their packs. They moved with the practiced stealth of those accustomed to evading detection, following the hidden paths the rebels had mapped through the priestcast's surveillance network. They were halfway back to the eastern caves when Trey's communication device buzzed, an unexpected signal that made them both freeze in alarm. "It's encrypted," Trey said, examining the small screen with furrowed brows. This can't be right. It's using a priestcast cipher." Nira's hand went instinctively to her bone knife. "A trap?" "Maybe." Trey's fingers worked the decryption sequence Dex had taught him. "Or maybe—" The message resolved into clear text, and Trey's eyes widened. "It's addressed to you, from someone named Kelvar." Nira snatched the device, her hands trembling. "Kelvar? That's impossible. He was my father's friend, a high priest in Zaruk's inner circle." The message was brief. "Daughter of Kalem, the archives hold the truth you seek. 3 cycles from now, Northern Temple entrance. The Red Moon's shadow will conceal you. Your father's work lives on." "It could still be a trap," Trey cautioned, though his voice betrayed his excitement. "Zaruk could have forced this Kelvar to lure you out. Or it could be our chance to access the original text," Nira countered. "The evidence we need to prove the priest's lies once and for all." Before they could debate further, the distant baying of hunting beasts reached their ears. The priestcast had released their trackers, genetically modified predators bred specifically to hunt heretics through the densest forests. "Debate later. Run now," Trey said, pocketing the device as they resumed their flight. They arrived at the eastern caves to find the community in a state of controlled urgency. News of the broadcast had already reached them, carried by their network of informants scattered throughout nearby settlements. Elder Saville greeted them with a grim expression. "Your message has lit a flame that cannot be extinguished," she said, leading them deeper into the cave network. "But Zaruk has responded with unprecedented force. He has declared martial law across all settlements. Anyone suspected of harboring heretical thoughts is being arrested, or worse." "Then we've made things worse," Nira said, her earlier elation fading. "No," Saville corrected firmly. "You've forced the priests to reveal their true nature. Already warriors in 3 settlements have refused orders to arrest their own kin. The cracks in the system are spreading." They gathered in the council chamber, where Dex and other rebel leaders awaited. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful as Nira shared Kelvar's message. "The Northern Temple entrance is the least guarded," Dex noted, "but still heavily patrolled, and we have no way to verify this Kelvar's intentions." "I might," came a voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned to see a slender blue figure, clearly female but with the distinctive facial markings of the priest caste. Several rebels reached for weapons, but Saville raised a hand for restraint. "This is Lissa," the elder explained. "She arrived during your broadcast, seeking sanctuary." "I am Kelvar's daughter," the newcomer said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of one trained in temple chants. "And like him, I have spent my life learning the truths the high priests suppress." Nira studied the young priest with suspicion. "Prove it." Without hesitation, Lissa removed a pendant from beneath her robes, a small stone carving identical to the one Dex had returned to Nira. "Your father made two of these," she said softly. "One for you, one for my father. They're keys, not just symbols." "Keys to what?" Trey asked. "To the true archives," Lissa replied. "The ones hidden beneath the public repository, the ones containing records of all who came before, including your kind, Trey Gordon." The revelation sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembled rebels. Lissa continued, her voice gaining strength. "The priest caste is not unified as they want you to believe. Many of us, especially the younger generation, see the corruption and lies. When your broadcast reached the temple, it triggered something my father has waited years for: open dissent within our ranks." "And Zarek's response?" Seville inquired. "Brutal. 3 priests who openly questioned him were executed on the spot." Lissa's vertical pupils contracted with remembered horror. "My father sent me here while he gathers others who share our views, but he needs the evidence in the hidden archives to sway those still uncertain." Trey's eyes met Nira's, the original texts. "More than texts," Lissa corrected. "Technology, artifacts from previous human visitors, devices the high priests have studied in secret for generations while preaching that sky travelers are demons." The implications were staggering. If the priests had access to advanced technology all along, their control over Kuroshian society was even more calculated than Nira had suspected. "We need to see these archives," Trey decided. "Not just for propaganda value, but to understand what we're truly facing." Planning consumed the next 2 days. Lissa provided detailed maps of the temple complex, identifying patrol patterns and sensor locations. Dex assembled a small team of former warriors who understood temple security protocols. Trey modified his remaining technology to counter the priest's surveillance systems. On the night of the 3rd cycle, as the red moon slipped into the shadow of its larger companion, 6 figures made their way through the dense forest toward the northern temple entrance. Nira and Trey moved at the center of the group, with Dex leading and Lissa providing authentication codes to bypass the temple's outer security measures. "Remember," Dex whispered as they approached the looming structure, "we're here for information only. No confrontations unless absolutely necessary." The temple's architecture was imposing, massive stone blocks carved with religious symbols, illuminated by ceremonial flames that never extinguished. Yet Lissa led them confidently to a seemingly solid wall where, with practiced movements, she pressed specific symbols in sequence. A section of wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow passage. "Service corridor," she explained, "used by acolytes to maintain the eternal flames without being seen by common worshippers." They slipped inside, the wall closing behind them. The passage was dimly lit by phosphorescent fungi similar to those in the rebel caves. Lissa navigated the winding corridors with the certainty of one raised within these walls, eventually bringing them to an ornate door marked with symbols none of the rebels recognized. "Ancient language," Lissa explained, "predating modern Kurosian. The high priest claimed to translate it through divine inspiration, but actually, she removed a small device from her robes, clearly technological, not mystical." Trey examined it with professional interest. "A translation matrix? Similar to my universal translator, but more specialized." "Exactly," Lissa confirmed. "Technology passed down through generations of high priests, supposedly gifts from the moons themselves." She activated the device, which projected symbols onto the door's surface. With Nera's pendant placed at the center, the door slid open, revealing a chamber that took their breath away. Unlike the stone and flame aesthetic of the upper temple, this room gleamed with metallic surfaces in subtle lighting that activated as they entered. Shelves lined the walls, holding not just ancient scrolls and tablets, but devices clearly mechanical in nature. At the center stood a console that, despite obvious age, hummed with operational power. "The true repository," Lissa whispered reverently, "knowledge spanning thousands of cycles." Trey approached the console, his fingers hovering over its surface with the caution of a pilot encountering unfamiliar controls. I recognize elements of this design. It's compatible with human technology from about 3 centuries ago." "Can you access it?" Nira asked. "I think so." Trey removed a small adapter from his pack and carefully connected it to his data device. "If I can interface with it, we can download rather than trying to physically remove anything." While Trey worked, Dex and the others secured the entrance and began documenting the chamber's contents. Nira joined Lissa at a section containing the oldest written records. Here, Lissa said, carefully unrolling a scroll. The original account of first contact between Corosians and humans. Nira read the ancient symbols, her father's teachings allowing her to decipher the text without Lissa's translator. 7 humans arrived in a vessel of metal and light, she translated aloud. They came in peace, seeking knowledge and offering the same in return. Their leader, called Hayes, spoke with the wisdom of many worlds. Her voice faltered as she continued reading. This can't be right. It says the humans helped cure a genetic illness affecting Corosian children, that they were welcomed as saviors, not feared as demons. Keep reading, Lissa urged. The sickness returned after the humans departed, more virulent than before. Many blamed their interference for strengthening the disease. The priest healers who had worked most closely with the humans claimed special knowledge from them, used this to gain influence, eventually established control over all knowledge to protect our people from further harm. Nira looked up, stunned. The priest caste began as healers who twisted a genuine crisis to seize power, and maintained it by demonizing those who had actually tried to help, Trey added from the console. Classic authoritarian tactic, create an external enemy to maintain internal control. It's worse than that, Lissa said. The records show the illness was already evolving before the humans arrived. They actually delayed its worst effects, giving our ancestors time to develop treatments. But the proto-priest caste rewrote history to consolidate their power. Trey's data device chimed. I've got something. Records of not just human visitors, but at least 3 other spacefaring species that made contact with Kuros over the millennia. His eyes widened as he scanned the information, including evidence that Kurosians themselves might be descendants of ancient space travelers who settled here thousands of years ago. The implications were staggering. An entire civilization's understanding of itself built on carefully constructed lies. Nira felt dizzy with the scope of the deception. Generations of her people living in artificial fear and ignorance to maintain the power of a few. A sudden commotion at the entrance interrupted her thoughts. One of Dex's warriors stumbled into the chamber, blue blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. We've been discovered, he gasped. Temple guards are coming, dozens of them. How? Dex demanded. We disabled the alarms. Someone knew we were coming, Lissa realized, her skin paling to a lighter blue. Someone? The massive door slid open before she could finish, revealing a contingent of heavily armed warriors. At their center stood High Priest Zaruk himself, his elaborate robes contrasting with the battle-ready stance of his guards. And beside him, wearing an expression of smug satisfaction, was the last person Nira expected to see, Elder Saville. The honored outsider returns to steal sacred knowledge, Zaruk proclaimed, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of one accustomed to ceremonial declarations. Along with the heretic daughter of a heretic father, how fitting that you should both meet your end in this chamber of forbidden truths. Saville, Nira breathed, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. We, Nira. The elder's face remained impassive. Power shifts to those who recognize which way the wind blows, child. The priest caste offered amnesty for the entire rebel community in exchange for you and the Sky Demon. And you believed them? Dex spat. I believed in survival, Saville replied coolly. The revolution was doomed from the start. Zaruk gestured and his warriors advanced, weapons ready. Seize them all. The executions will be public. A reminder of what happens to those who question the will of the moons. Chaos erupted as Dex and his warriors met the temple guards head-on. The clash of metal against metal filled the ancient chamber, the sounds of combat echoing off technology that predated the conflict by centuries. Trey grabbed Nira's arm, pulling her toward a secondary exit Lissa had identified during their planning. We have to go, now. The data is more important than any single battle. But Dex, Nira protested, watching her friend locked in combat with 2 temple guards. We'll die for nothing if we're all captured, Trey countered. The knowledge is what matters. It's what he's fighting for us to protect. The logic was undeniable, however painful. Nira allowed Trey to pull her toward the exit, where Lissa was already working to unseal an ancient doorway. As they reached it, A commanding voice cut through the chaos. Enough of this farce, Zaruk. The fighting paused as all eyes turned to the new arrival, an elderly priest with elaborate facial markings denoting the highest ranks of the temple hierarchy. Despite his age, he carried himself with rigid dignity, and the warriors on both sides instinctively lowered their weapons in his presence. Kelvar, Zaruk hissed, your treachery is now complete. My loyalty to truth remains intact, the old priest countered, as does my duty to the real history of our people. He turned to address the temple guards directly. Warriors, you have been sworn to protect the will of the moons, but for generations you have instead protected lies. See for yourselves. With surprising strength, Kelvar activated the central console, which projected images onto the chamber walls, scenes of ancient Kurosians working alongside humans, historical recordings that directly contradicted the priest's teachings. This is manipulation, Zaruk shouted, but uncertainty had already crept into the warriors' postures. The momentary confusion provided the opening they needed. Kelvar strode purposefully to Nira's side. Go, he commanded. Take what you've learned to the settlements. I will handle matters here. Father, no, Lissa cried, recognizing his intent. This is my atonement, daughter, Kelvar said gently. For too many years of silence. Trey understood immediately. He's creating a diversion. We need to use it. With a final grateful nod to Kelvar, they slipped through the doorway Lissa had unsealed, emerging into a narrow tunnel that led away from the temple complex. Behind them, they heard Kelvar's voice rising in the formal cadence of ancient Kurosian law, invoking protocols even Zaruk couldn't easily dismiss. They ran until their lungs burned, finally emerging from the tunnel into the dense forest beyond the settlement boundaries. Only then did they realize their group was smaller than it should have been. Dex? Nira spun around, searching desperately. Where's Dex? Captured, Lissa said, her voice breaking. I saw the guards subdue him just before we escaped. And my father sacrificed himself to give us this chance. The weight of what had happened, what they had gained and lost, settled over them like a physical burden. Trey checked his data device, confirming the precious information remained intact. We can't go back to the caves, he said, not with Sevil's betrayal. We need somewhere else to regroup. The Forbidden Valleys, Lissa suggested after a moment's thought. The territories beyond the Middle Ridge where the instabilities are too dangerous for regular patrols. You're suggesting we head into the most dangerous region of Kuros? Nira asked incredulously. I'm suggesting we go where the priests fear to follow, Lissa corrected, and where, according to the archives, ruins of the original human settlement might still exist. Trey's expression brightened. If there's functional technology there, I might be able to boost my distress beacon. Actually call for help, rather than just hoping someone passes close enough to detect it. With no better options, they set off toward the distant ridgeline that marked the boundary of established Kurosian territories. Behind them, alarm horns echoed across the valley as the temple mobilized for pursuit. They traveled for 3 days through increasingly difficult terrain. The familiar forest gave way to twisted landscapes where the laws of nature seemed to warp and shift. Vegetation took on strange colorations and impossible geometries. Even the ground beneath their feet occasionally rippled like liquid, despite remaining solid enough to walk upon. On the second day, they encountered their first major instability, a clearing where gravity fluctuated wildly. Rocks floated upward, only to crash down moments later, and trees grew in spiral patterns that defied natural physics. Navigating through required timing their movements between gravitational pulses, each of them nearly being pulled skyward at least once. That night, they camped in the hollow of a massive crystalline formation that hummed with subtle vibrations. The sound should have been maddening, but somehow induced a deep, restorative sleep, the first real rest any of them had experienced since the temple raid. The instabilities, Lissa explained as they continued their journey, passing through a field of crystalline formations that hummed with discordant tones when touched. Natural phenomena the priests attributed to the moon's displeasure, but actually the result of something the archives called quantum fluctuations in this region. Whatever they are, they're affecting my equipment, Trey noted, examining his devices with concern. And he paused, breaking into a sudden coughing fit that left him winded. Nira touched his arm, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. You're ill. Just the atmosphere, Trey dismissed, though his complexion had taken on an unhealthy pallor. Higher oxygen content than I'm used to. I'll adjust. But Lissa's expression suggested otherwise. The archives mention this. Human physiology can tolerate Kuros's environment temporarily, but long-term exposure causes progressive respiratory and cellular damage. How long-term? Nira demanded. Lissa hesitated. A few months, perhaps. Eventually, the damage becomes irreversible. The implication was clear. Even if they succeeded in their mission, Trey couldn't remain on Kuros indefinitely. The knowledge added urgency to their already desperate situation. By the third day, they faced the most dangerous instability yet, a ravine where reality itself seemed to fragment. The air shimmered with rainbow-colored distortions, and occasionally objects, rocks, plants, even small animals, would simply vanish, only to reappear elsewhere moments later, sometimes transformed in disturbing ways. We can't cross that, Nira said, watching a bird disappear mid-flight only to reappear as separate, still living components, each fragment continuing to fly independently. We must, Lissa insisted. The nomad territories lie just beyond. Trey studied the patterns of distortion, noting that they pulsed in a seemingly random but potentially predictable sequence. There's a rhythm to it, he observed through another bout of coughing. If we time our crossing precisely, they spent hours observing, Trey charting the patterns on his data device despite his increasingly labored breathing. Finally, he identified a sequence, a brief window where the distortions receded enough to allow safe passage. One by one, they made the harrowing crossing, sprinting through reality's tiers with only Trey's countdown guiding them. On the fourth day, they crested a ridge and encountered something unexpected, a small encampment of Kurosians unlike any Nira had seen before. Their skin displayed patterns of both blue and beige tones, and their pupils, while still vertical, were rounder than normal. They carried primitive weapons, spears and bows, but showed no immediate hostility. Outsiders, their apparent leader said, approaching cautiously, from beyond the middle ridge. Few venture this far. We seek sanctuary, Nira explained, and perhaps knowledge. The leader studied them, his gaze lingering on Trey with particular interest. A sky traveler, he observed, like those in the old stories. You know of humans? Trey asked, surprised. We are part human, came the unexpected reply. Many generations removed, but the blood remains. I am Soren, elder of the Nomad tribe. The revelation stunned them into momentary silence. Here was living proof of what the archives had suggested. Humans and Kurosians had not only coexisted, but integrated to some degree in the distant past. Soren welcomed them to the Nomad camp, where they discovered an entire community of hybrid descendants living in harmony with Kuros's most unstable regions. These people had developed unique adaptations, sensing imminent fluctuations, navigating the ever-changing landscape, even using the instabilities to hide from priestcast observers. The nomads lived in dwellings constructed from the crystalline formations, somehow stabilized against the quantum fluctuations. Their clothing featured intricate patterns that seemed to bend light around the wearer, a natural camouflage in the chaotic environment. Most surprisingly, they practiced a form of shared knowledge stewardship, with information accessible to all members rather than controlled by an elite few. Our ancestors chose exile over subjugation, Soren explained, as they shared a meal around a communal fire. When the priest caste began their purge of dangerous knowledge, those with mixed heritage were among the first targeted. Yet you preserved your history, Lissa noted, through oral tradition in these. Soren revealed markings on his skin similar to the ancient symbols in the archives. Each elder carries a portion of our knowledge, inscribed where it cannot be easily destroyed. That night, as Trey's condition worsened despite nomad remedies, Soren shared legends of the machines that speak to stars, devices left by the original human settlers in a location the nomads considered sacred. Our most gifted young guide, Tala, can lead you there, he offered, but the journey is perilous. The instabilities grow more extreme the closer one approaches. While Trey rested, fighting fever and increasingly labored breathing, Nira and Lissa reviewed the data they'd stolen from the archives. Among the files was a shocking discovery, communications suggesting Zarek had planned to execute Dex publicly during the next major ceremonial gathering, 3 days hence. A warning to others, Lissa translated grimly, to demonstrate the consequences of heresy. "We have to save him," Nira insisted, her dual hearts constricting at the thought of her friend's execution. "How?" Lissa countered. "We're days from the settlement, with temple guards hunting us and Trey growing weaker by the hour." "The relay station first," Trey said, joining them despite his obvious illness. "If we can boost my beacon and call for help, we gain options. Without outside intervention, we're just postponing the inevitable." It was the logical choice, however painful. The next morning, they set out with Tala as their guide, a young female nomad with extraordinary sensitivity to the fluctuations. She led them through impossible landscapes where reality itself seemed to fold and refold like origami, following paths invisible to ordinary perception. After a day of increasingly difficult travel, they reached their destination, a structure unlike anything on Kuros, partially embedded in a crystalline formation that pulsed with energy. Its architecture was clearly human in origin, though modified and expanded over time. "The ancient station," Tala announced reverently, "the place where worlds connect." Inside, they discovered a facility in remarkably good condition, preserved by the same quantum phenomena that made the region so dangerous. Trey's excitement overcame his illness as he explored the control systems, many of which responded to his touch despite centuries of dormancy. "It's a communications relay," he confirmed, his voice hoarse but triumphant, "designed to amplify signals from this region of space. If I can interface my beacon with these systems..." While Trey worked, Nira and Lissa explored the facility's database, discovering records left by the original human expedition. The truth they uncovered was both simpler and more profound than they had imagined. They were researchers, Nira translated, studying Kuros's unique properties. When the illness broke out, they tried to help using their medical knowledge, but their interventions had unintended consequences, helping some, harming others due to genetic variations they didn't fully understand. And the proto-priests exploited the situation, Lissa continued, reading further, claiming special understanding of the humans' methods, using the crisis to establish themselves as the sole interpreters of outside knowledge, turning genuine tragedy into manufactured authority, Trey added from the communications console, a pattern repeated throughout human history too. After hours of work, Trey finally achieved what seemed impossible. The ancient relay station hummed to life, amplifying his distress beacon 1,000-fold. For the first time since his crash landing, a direct communication link to human space was established. "Unidentified vessel, this is research ship Horizon responding to emergency beacon. Please identify." The sound of a human voice, not Trey's, echoing through the ancient facility left them all momentarily speechless. Trey recovered first, explaining their situation in rapid terms. The response was immediate. "We're approximately 20 days from your position at maximum speed. Hold tight, Trey Gordon. Help is coming." It should have been a moment of pure triumph. Instead, Nira felt her heart sink. 20 days, too late for Dex. Trey's fever-bright eyes met hers. "Not if we act now." Using the station's enhanced scanning capabilities, they located Dex held in the Central Temple's detention level, heavily guarded but alive. The public execution was scheduled for the following day's dawn ceremony. "It's impossible," Lissa argued. "The temple security will be at its highest. Even if we could reach it in time, we'd never get past the guards." "Unless we had help from inside," Trey suggested. "What inside help? My father is likely dead or imprisoned, and the other dissidents will be watched closely." "Not the priests," Trey clarified. "The warrior caste. You said yourself many were starting to question their loyalty after seeing the archive evidence." It was a desperate plan, relying on too many uncertainties. But when Tala revealed a nomad's secret, paths through the fluctuations that could transport them vast distances if navigated precisely, it transformed from impossible to merely improbable. They spent the night preparing. Trey, despite his worsening condition, modified the communication devices to broadcast on frequencies used by the warrior caste. Lissa composed messages in specific ceremonial formats that would resonate with warrior traditions. Nira prepared weapons, knowing that regardless of how many allies they might find, combat was inevitable. At first light, they entered the fluctuation path Tala had identified, a shimmering corridor of distorted space that seemed to fold distance rather than crossing it. The journey was disorienting, nauseating, and mercifully brief. When they emerged, they stood on a ridge overlooking the central settlement, the great temple dominating its center. Below, crowds were already gathering for the dawn ceremony. A platform had been erected before the temple steps, Dex's execution stage. The square swarmed with warriors, their weapons ready, their formation tighter than usual. On the temple steps stood Zaruk, his elaborate ceremonial armor glinting in the early light. Beside him, a bound and beaten Dex knelt awaiting his fate. Lissa gasped. There are twice as many guards as normal. Zaruk must have called in warriors from other settlements. More desperate measures, Trey observed, suppressing another coughing fit. He knows the balance is shifting. Trey activated their modified transmitter, and Lissa spoke the carefully crafted message. Warriors of Kuros, heirs to the ancient honor code. You guard lies, not truth. The Sky Travelers were allies, not demons. Proof awaits those with courage to see. The execution is sacrilege against true tradition. They repeated the broadcast 3 times, then waited, watching for any response. Minutes passed with no visible reaction. Then, as Dex was hauled to his feet and Zaruk raised the ceremonial execution blade, a disturbance rippled through the warrior ranks. One guard stepped away from his position, then another. Within moments, a small but significant portion of the warrior caste had broken formation, creating gaps in the security perimeter. Now, Nira breathed, and they moved. The rescue that followed would later become legend throughout Kuroshan settlements. 3 figures charging through a religious ceremony, armed not just with weapons, but with truth. Temple loyalists fought to stop them, but found themselves hindered by their own comrades. Zaruk screamed orders that were increasingly ignored. Nira reached the platform first, her bone knife slashing through the ropes that bound Dex while Trey and Lissa held off attackers. Dex was barely conscious, his blue skin mottled with darker patches where he'd been beaten. You came, he mumbled in disbelief. Always, Nira replied, supporting his weight as they retreated. The 4 fought their way back through the confusion, aided by warriors who had chosen to believe the evidence of the archives over generations of priestly doctrine. A path opened before them as more warriors simply stood down, refusing to attack. They had almost reached the settlement's edge when disaster struck. A loyalist guard, seeing his last chance to stop the escape, hurled a ceremonial spear with deadly accuracy. Trey shoved Nira aside, taking the weapon in his shoulder instead of her heart's. He collapsed, blood, red, not indigo, soaking his tunic. Go, he gasped as Nira tried to help him. Get to safety. Not without you, she insisted, supporting his weight as Dex and Lissa cleared a path forward. They escaped into the forest, pursued by diminishing numbers of loyalists as more warriors simply stood down, unwilling to continue enforcing orders they no longer trusted. By nightfall, they had reached a predetermined rendezvous point where Lissa had arranged for sympathizers to meet them, including, to their surprise, a significant number of lower-ranking priests. The broadcast did more than just help us rescue Dex, Lissa explained, as they tended to Trey's wound. It confirmed what many already suspected. Questions are spreading faster than Zaruk can suppress them. But their victory came at a cost. Trey's condition deteriorated rapidly. The combination of the spear wound and his body's ongoing reaction to Kuros's environment pushing him toward a crisis point. Even with the medical knowledge of the rebel priests, they could only stabilize him temporarily. He needs help beyond our capabilities, one priest healer admitted. His physiology is too different. The human ship won't arrive for 19 more days, Nira said, her voice hollow with despair. He might not last that long. Then we make one final broadcast, Dex suggested. Not just to the settlements this time, but to the stars. The plan crystallized quickly. They would return to the ancient relay station, using its power to transmit the complete truth to every settlement on Kuros while simultaneously sending a more urgent distress call to the approaching human vessel. The evidence from the archives, combined with testimony from rebel priests and warriors, would create an irrefutable case against the foundations of priest caste authority. The journey back through the fluctuation paths was even more difficult with Trey's deteriorating condition. When they finally reached the station, he was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. While Lissa and the rebel priest prepared the broadcast, Nira stayed at Trey's firebide, monitoring his faltering life signs. In a moment of lucidity, he grasped her hand. "Worth it," he whispered, "all of it, to help your world find truth." "Our world," Nira corrected fiercely. "You're part of Kuros now, Trey Gordon. You don't get to leave us so easily." The final broadcast was Nira's voice, strong, clear, and unwavering, as she shared the complete history of Kuros, including records of cooperation between early humans and Kurosians. She revealed the artificial divisions of the caste system, the deliberate suppression of knowledge, and the potential for a different way of living demonstrated by the nomad tribes and the rebel community. "We were never meant to fear the stars," she concluded, "or each other. The truth has been kept from us, not to protect us, but to control us. Today, that ends." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Reports flooded in from settlements across the continent. Spontaneous gatherings, priest caste authorities being peacefully but firmly removed from power, ancient texts emerging from hiding places where knowledge keepers had preserved them through generations of oppression. But victory brought new complications. The sudden collapse of the system that had governed Kurosian society for centuries created a dangerous vacuum. Some settlements descended into chaos as the old structures dissolved without clear replacements. Even as they monitored these developments, a more immediate crisis loomed. Zaruk, having escaped the central temple with his most loyal followers, had tracked them to the relay station. Their perimeter sensors detected a substantial force approaching, the high priest's final desperate attempt to silence the truth. "We can't fight them all," Dex assessed grimly, "not with our numbers." "We don't need to win," Nira replied. "Just hold out long enough for the broadcast to reach every settlement. Once the truth is fully dispersed, Zaruk's cause is lost regardless of what happens to us." They prepared for a last stand, establishing defensive positions around the ancient facility. The rebel warriors and priests who had joined them accepted the likely outcome with solemn determination. Their sacrifice would ensure Kuros's future freedom. As Zaruk's forces surrounded the station, a strange calm settled over Nira. She had come full circle, once again hunted, once again taking refuge in a structure built by sky travelers. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she had purpose beyond mere survival. The attack, when it came, was relentless. Zaruk's loyalists charged the station's defenses with fanatic determination, their high priest having convinced them that this was their final chance to preserve the sacred order. The defenders fought with equal conviction, each knowing the importance of buying time for the broadcast to complete its work. The station shuddered under the assault. Ancient walls designed for research, not warfare, began to crack under repeated impacts. The defenders fell back room by room, their numbers dwindling. Nira and Dex fought side by side, their movements coordinated by years of friendship and shared struggle. But even their skill couldn't hold back the tide indefinitely. In the central control room, Lissa maintained the broadcast, her fingers dancing across the ancient console with desperate precision. "3 more minutes," she called out. "The transmission cycle must complete." Zaruk's voice echoed through the station's corridors, commanding his followers forward with increasing urgency. He knew as well as they did that his time was running out. If the broadcast completed its cycle, reaching even the most remote settlements, his authority would be irrevocably shattered. In the midst of battle, with the outcome still hanging in the balance, Trey's communication device activated unexpectedly. The voice that emerged was clear despite the chaos surrounding them. "Attention, Kurosian forces. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Earth research vessel Horizon. We have accelerated to emergency velocity and will achieve orbit in approximately 20 minutes. Cease hostilities immediately or face intervention." The fighting stuttered, then resumed with increased desperation as Zaruk urged his followers to complete their mission before the humans arrived. But the announcement had shifted momentum. More warriors laid down their weapons, unwilling to be caught fighting against a newly arriving human vessel after learning the truth about past contact. From her position, defending the station's main entrance, Nara spotted Zaruk himself, no longer commanding from safety, but charging forward with uncharacteristic personal courage. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and in that moment, Nira recognized something unexpected in the high priest's gaze. Not hatred or fanaticism, but fear. The fear of a being whose entire identity was dissolving before him. The sight left her with an unexpected sense of pity. Zaruk was as much a victim of the system as its perpetuator. Raised from birth to believe in his divine right to lead, now confronting the collapse of everything he knew. Before Nira could process this insight, the sky blazed with light. A massive vessel, far larger than Trey's crashed ship, descended through Kuros's atmosphere with impossible grace. It hovered above the battlefield, its presence alone forcing all combat to cease as Kurosians on both sides stared upward in awe. Smaller craft deployed from the vessel, landing in cleared areas around the station. Humans emerged, dozens of them, equipped with technology that made their intentions clear without requiring violence. The battle ended not with a climactic clash, but with a whimper of surrender and confusion. In the aftermath, as human medical personnel rushed to treat Trey and the other wounded, Nira found herself face to face with Zaruk. The high priest had been captured, his elaborate robes torn and stained, his once commanding presence diminished by defeat. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice hollow. "Millennia of tradition, stability, purpose, gone in an instant." "No," Nira replied gently. "We've freed our people from lies. What they build in place of those lies will be their choice, not yours, not mine." "And what of me?" Zaruk asked, a shadow of his former arrogance surfacing. "Will your revolution require my execution, as tradition would demand?" The question gave Nira pause. The old ways would indeed call for Zaruk's death, a symbolic end to the system he represented. Yet something in that approach felt like perpetuating the cycle rather than breaking it. "No," she decided, "you'll face justice, but not execution. Your greatest punishment will be living in the world you tried to prevent, watching Kurosians thrive with knowledge freely shared." The human doctor stabilized Trey, reversing the damage from both his wound and his prolonged exposure to Kuros's environment. When he regained consciousness 3 days later, he found Nira at his bedside, her expression a complex mixture of relief and uncertainty. "We won," she told him simply. "At what cost?" he asked, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Less than feared, more than hoped," she replied. "Some settlements are struggling with the transition. Others are embracing change perhaps too enthusiastically. It's messy." "Freedom usually is," Trey said with a weak smile. "What happens now?" The question wasn't just about Kuros's political situation, and they both knew it. With the human vessel now in orbit, Trey had a way home, back to Earth, to his own kind, to an environment that wouldn't slowly kill him. The human captain, Rodriguez, has offered to establish a permanent research outpost here, Nira explained, to help us recover lost knowledge, stabilize our society, reconnect with the wider universe. They're asking for Kurosian volunteers to serve as liaisons. "You'd be perfect for that role," Trey observed. "Perhaps." Nira hesitated, then continued. "And they need humans who understand our world, our people who could serve as bridges between cultures." The implication hung between them, a future neither had dared imagine during their desperate flight and fight. Trey reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that transcended their biological differences. "I crashed on this world, expecting to die alone," he said softly. "Instead, I found purpose. And you." "I found you in darkness, expecting to be devoured," Nira replied, her dual hearts quickening. "Instead, you helped me find my voice, my strength." Outside the medical facility, Kuros continued its tumultuous transformation. The priest caste's authority had collapsed, but new systems were already emerging. Councils of representatives from all former castes, knowledge-sharing networks spanning settlements, integration of nomad tribes into mainstream society. The transition would not be simple or swift, but it had begun irreversibly. In the northern settlement, a former warrior named Telva organized a community library where texts once forbidden were freely shared. In the western valleys, a group of former priests established a school that welcomed students of all backgrounds, teaching not just reading but critical thinking. The eastern caves, once a hiding place for rebels, became a center for historical research, where scholars documented both the truths and lies that had shaped Kurosian society. Most remarkable was the transformation of the central temple itself. Under the guidance of both human researchers and Kurosian knowledge keepers, The sacred archives were open to all. The ancient technologies within, once tools of control, were repurposed to facilitate a renaissance of learning. Where execution platforms had once stood, public forums emerged where ideas could be freely debated. The change wasn't without resistance. Pockets of priest-caste loyalists retreated to remote regions, vowing to preserve the true ways. Some settlements rejected both the old hierarchy and the new openness, isolating themselves completely. Occasional conflicts erupted over resources or historical grievances newly unearthed. Yet the overwhelming trajectory was toward connection rather than division. The truth about Kuros's past, its relationship with humans and other spacefaring species, its own possible origins among the stars, inspired a cultural shift that no single battle could have achieved. In the end, the revolution wasn't won through a single broadcast or battle, but through thousands of individual Kurosians choosing truth over comfortable lies. The human presence served as catalyst and stabilizer, but the change came from within, just as Nira and Trey had hoped. 6 months later, as the three moons aligned in a rare configuration, a new communication center opened on the site of the former central temple. Its purpose was simple but profound, ensuring knowledge would never again be controlled by the few. And at its dedication ceremony stood two figures who embodied its mission: a Kurosian who had dared to question and a human who had chosen to stay. Was it worth it? A newly arrived human researcher asked Trey as they watched Nira address the gathered crowd. Giving up Earth to remain here? Trey smiled, watching the blue-skinned woman who had once feared he would eat her, who had instead become his partner in revolution and rebuilding. I'm exactly where I need to be, he replied, helping a world find its future.